Good morning. I'm Christy Ashley, an Associate Dean in URI's College of Business. On behalf of Dean Sean Edmund Rogers, the rest of the College of Business Executive Leadership Team, and the Honors Program, I would like to welcome you to a special program that is connected to the 60th Honors Colloquium, which is titled Not Business as Usual, Business for the Common Good. We are fortunate today to have Senator Whitehouse share his thoughts on the intersection of dark money, climate change, and the corporate capture of the Supreme Court. I want to welcome President Parlange, our Provost, Barbara Wolf, and other members of President Parlange's team who are with us today. The President is delivering the State of the University Today address in a few hours in this room, and thank you for your continued support. Before we start, I would like to share the University of Rhode Island land acknowledgement. The University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping ground of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. We honor and respect the enduring and continuing relationship between the Indigenous people and this land by teaching and learning more about their history and present-day communities, and by becoming stewards of the land that we too inhabit. I have the privilege of working with professors of management, Doug Creed and Sarai Erganay, and a fantastic team. One critical member of this team is Associate Teaching Professor of Accounting, Anne-Marie Sacco, who's responsible for today's event. Please give her a warm round of applause. Among other things, Professor Sacco advises the Women in Business Club. Women in Business Club President, Grace Legier, is joining Professor Sacco on stage. Both are exemplars of impact in action. Please give them both a warm welcome as they come up on the stage. There will be a question and answer session following the senator's speech. Sheldon Whitehouse represents Rhode Island in the United States Senate, where he's earned a reputation as a fierce advocate for progressive values and a thoughtful legislator capable of reaching across the aisle to achieve bipartisan solutions. The senator has stood as a staunch defender of Social Security and Medicare and has made improving care and reducing costs in our health care system a hallmark of his career. Whitehouse has long fought to position America as a leader in the clean energy economy and protect the ocean state from the consequences of climate change. To counteract the corrosive effects of special interests in our democracy, the senator has championed efforts to root out dark money from our elections and make Congress and the courts accountable to the American people. Senator Whitehouse has also been at the center of bipartisan efforts to rebuild the nation's infrastructure, reform the criminal and juvenile justice systems, protect Americans from toxic chemicals, and address ocean plastic waste. Recognizing the devastating toll of addiction in Rhode Island and across the nation, the senator authored the most significant bipartisan law to address the opioid crisis. Sheldon served as Rhode Island's U.S. Attorney and State Attorney General before being elected to the Senate, where he is chairman of the Budget Committee and serves on the Finance Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Environment and Public Works Committee. It is my honor to introduce Senator Sheldon Whitehouse as he presents the intersection of dark money, climate change, and the corporate capture of the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Christy. It is a pleasure to be here. Particular appreciation to President Parlange, but to all of the faculty and students who are here. Thank you so much, particularly Professor Sacco and Leger. Looking forward to our conversation. Before I get to my remarks, I just wanted to say a quick word about the terrible situation that has befallen our ally and friend Israel. And we gathered at the Jewish Community Center under the auspices of the Jewish Alliance of Rhode Island last night with the entire federal delegation to express support for Israel in this awful time. We have a long history between Rhode Island and Israel. I came into politics as a young staffer for Governor Bruce Sundlun. And one of Governor Sundlun's exploits, he was a man of many exploits, was as Israel was declaring its independence and as President Truman was becoming making America the first country to recognize Israel, Bruce and some other bomber pilot veterans of World War II had gotten their hands on a number of American bombers that they were able to buy privately. They'd been decommissioned, and flew them to Israel and landed the aircraft in Israel as some of the first aircraft of the Israeli Air Force. So I think a lot of our hearts are going out to our Jewish friends and in many cases family who are suffering from the terrible stories that are coming out of Israel and Gaza right now. And when we get back to Washington, in addition to supporting Ukraine as strongly as we can, we will also make every effort to make sure that Israel has every asset that she needs to defend herself successfully and to rid the world of the kind of brutality that Hamas has engaged in. So, to the topic at hand, I get around Rhode Island quite a lot, and the thing that I'm asked most about my Senate life is, what's wrong with our country? And what can we do about it? When I engage with younger people, the question usually is, why are we so bad on climate? And what can we do about it? And most recently, it's what's happened to our Supreme Court? And what can we do about it? I think the answer to all three questions, the answers are related. And the common theme revolves around corruption. Corruption is a tough word. I've prosecuted cases of political corruption. But remember, the word corruption covers a lot of activity. There's criminal quid pro quo corruption, like a bribe. There's the corruption that America's founding generation wrote about, of unhealthy governance, of disease in the body politic. And then there's the moral corruption in our own human hearts when we allow ourselves to become accepting of the unacceptable. So what's gone wrong? I think people in America understand in a very deep way that this representative democracy of ours is not so representative anymore. My own experience and peer-reviewed academic studies and public polling all agree. Government is often failing to heed the American people, at least in many key areas. Why is that? The Watergate scandal made famous the phrase, "follow the money." So let's follow the money. There's always been too much money in politics, and it's always had too much influence. That's not new. Money has been called the mother's milk of politics. It's been said that the two most important things in politics are money, and I can't think what the other thing is. So money's influence has long been a problem. But the Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court put the political power of money into hyperdrive. And the Supreme Court allowing all that new political money to be spent anonymously turned that influence toxic. Basic information about the political arena, basic information necessary for people to be good and active citizens, was denied to the public. Power shifted dramatically to political interests that had the means and the motive to spend unlimited amounts of money in politics. And politics changed. Creepy new political beasts like super PACs emerged in the political landscape. Nowadays, every serious presidential candidate has to have their private super PAC. Before Citizens United, those things didn't even exist. After Citizens United, an influential interest can ask for a private meeting and promise a party leader to make hundreds of millions of dollars secretly available. They can run the hundreds of millions through arrays of front groups with friendly names like Americans for Prosperity, and they can make secret demands in return. What's wrong with our country? We've let unlimited secret money into politics. A rough count now is 4 billion secret dollars spent. All that secret money has distorted our democracy, powered up the special interests, and powered down the people. And voters felt it and became disheartened and frustrated and angry. Frankly, they should be. Hell, I'm angry. Which brings us to climate. Congress's collapse on climate coincides perfectly with Citizens United. Before Citizens United, there was bipartisan Senate work on climate that produced multiple bipartisan proposals. In 2008, my friend John McCain ran for president as a Republican on a serious climate platform. After January of 2010, when Citizens United was decided, bipartisanship on climate was snuffed out, dead. Climate is now a partisan issue, but it's a partisan issue only because the fossil fuel industry spent hundreds of millions of dollars secretly through front groups to make it partisan, to eliminate Republican support for any serious climate legislation. We got lucky last Congress when the House and the Senate and the presidency aligned politically, and a Senate budget rule allowed 51 Senate Democrats to pass what's called a reconciliation bill through a process that defeats the 60-vote Senate filibuster rule. That's how the big climate provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act got passed. That's also how we broke the grip of big pharma on drug pricing and the grip of corporate America on some of the excessive corporate tax preferences. We're not so lucky now. The House is in fossil fuel hands. If you want a stat on that, the House proposal, their demand to spare us a government default on our U.S. credit, was a 315-page bill. 275 pages of that 315-page bill were fossil fuel giveaways. So the chances now of Congress doing more on climate are near zero. Indeed, they don't even have a speaker. There are things the executive branch can do within existing laws. Here are 5. 1, getting offshore wind back on track, and I'm hounding them on that. 2, effectively implement the Inflation Reduction Act, a complicated task which the White House seems to be handling pretty well. 3, a vigorous methane leak enforcement task force, which has recently been formed, but whose structure and pace and vigor remain uncertain. This could be a big deal since satellites can now identify, spot, and track major methane leaks. 4, a government-wide social cost of carbon. That's actually now wending its way through the Environmental Protection Agency at $190 per ton of carbon emissions, a serious, forceful carbon price. And the Office of Management and Budget has just issued guidance for that social cost of carbon to be implemented throughout all executive agencies. I will be policing that effort as to breadth and vigor of implementation, but step 1 is to clear the $190 per ton cost through the Administrative Procedures Act process and into law at the EPA. Last, number 5, a positive response by the Biden administration to the EU CBAM, a recently adopted European border tariff that will penalize goods imported from high-polluting countries. A carbon border tariff, a pollution fee on imports, gives a big economic incentive for high-polluting countries to clean up their act. America should have one, and I'm working on a bipartisan one. So, 2 fun facts for the background on all of this. Fun fact 1, the International Monetary Fund calculates that the fossil fuel industry floats on an annual subsidy in the United States alone of over $700 billion. Defending a subsidy of that magnitude, the fossil fuel polluters will not go quietly. You can spend a lot of dark money to defend a $700 billion annual subsidy. It may be the most lucrative thing the fossil fuel industry does. Fun fact 2, the entire planet-wide energy production of the human species amounts to about half a zettajoule. A joule, as the scientists in the room will know, is the standard unit of measure for heat energy. A zettajoule is a number so big it has 21 zeros. The pollution from the fossil fuel component of that half zettajoule of human-produced energy creates in turn an atmospheric greenhouse effect that drives 14 zettajoules of heat every year into our oceans. That is multiple Hiroshima-sized nuclear blasts worth of excess heat into the oceans per second. And it's a nearly 30-to-1 penalty for the energy derived from fossil fuels. So if you want to know why Narragansett Bay is 3 degrees warmer, why sea levels are rising, why ocean storms are worse, why Florida is becoming uninsurable, look to the zettajoules. So from these 2 fun facts, the enormous subsidy and the enormous effect, we know 2 things. 1, we have to fix this fast. And 2, to do so is going to be a fight. Last is the Supreme Court. There is a practice that you can read about in university libraries called agency capture or regulatory capture. If you want to spare yourself reading that robust academic literature, imagine 19th century railroad barons seeing to it that the Railroad Commission that set the rates they could charge was stacked with their cronies and their operatives. And you'll get regulatory capture. I've tracked for years how that happened to our Supreme Court. I wrote a book about it. I speak about that scheme on the Senate floor frequently. This was a decades-long regulatory capture operation run as clandestinely as a covert intelligence operation, as secretly as they could. And that secrecy got a big boost from dark money. And the target, of course, was not some regulatory agency, not some railroad commission. The target was the United States Supreme Court. So let's wrap it up. What's wrong with our politics, and what's wrong with our climate policies, and what's wrong with our Supreme Court all converge. And they converge around dark money. Secret influence through dark money weaves through all three. In politics, politicians pivoted toward the new dark money power elite, turning their backs on the American people, and the American people noticed. On climate, real climate policies were crushed in hyperdrived political warfare, warfare easily funded with just a fraction of the $700 billion annual subsidy Congress permits for fossil fuels. And at the court, dark money flooded the Federalist Society when it chose the Supreme Court justices the big money folks wanted. And dark money flooded the Judicial Crisis Network to fund advertising campaigns for the chosen justices' confirmations. And dark money flooded Senate leadership super PACs as the rank and file voted to confirm even very troubled nominees. And today, dark money washes into dozens of front groups that appear in Supreme Court cases to advise the chosen justices how they should rule. The bad news from all this mess is indeed bad. Democracy in America is vulnerable. We're on the edge of a planetary emergency of human habitability. And we have a court that has become the secret weapon of secretive right-wing billionaires. The good news from all this mess is that we can get rid of dark money and make a new morning in American politics. We have the policy tools to steer the world toward climate safety once politics permits that. And as people increasingly understand what went wrong at the court, the aperture for reforms will open, and we can put the court back on proper track as a real court again. I always used to wonder why it was considered a Chinese curse to live in interesting times. Now it's getting so interesting that I'm starting to understand. Before it gets too interesting, please make sure you get involved as citizens and demand the necessary repairs. There are times in history when the duties of citizenship are light. The burden is easy, and democracy needs little attention. In interesting times, the demands are real, the burdens can be heavy, and it's on us to measure up. This is one of those demanding, interesting, historic times. It's not our first. Other American generations met their moment. I hope we measure up too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
My pleasure.
We were going to have our questions come in two separate ways. We're going to have dark money first, and then climate change?
Sure.
Okay. So with dark money, one of the ways we've been talking about it is in a chronological order,
Yeah.
starting with the 20s, which we don't know much, I don't know much about.
Yeah.
But then again, with some of Watergate and Gore versus Bush, and then more importantly, the Federalist Society.
Yeah.
So they'll have those kind of questions.
I think the three kind of watershed moments that come to mind as an amateur historian are Teddy Roosevelt going to war against the trusts and cleaning up enormous corporate political corruption in America. And then we kind of backslid until the Nixon corruption, particularly with his near impeachment and resignation, created enormous political turbulence and a very powerful motive to clean up politics so that he was basically caught taking huge bribes to affect policy. And so there was a second big cleanup then, and then the recent Supreme Court decision, the Citizens United decision, just opened a doorway to a very dark period in history that allowed enormous influence to be brought to bear. I came to the Senate as an environmentalist. My wife is a URI PhD from the Graduate School of Oceanography. She knows cold what climate change is doing to our bay and to our oceans. It's pretty undeniable. And so I went to try to be helpful, and for the first 3 years there, 07, 08, and 09, there was nonstop activity. There were bipartisan hearings. There were bipartisan bills. John McCain was running with a good platform. It all looked fine. And we came back from the holidays after Christmas 2009, and the Supreme Court decision came down, I want to say January 10th that year, and instantly all that bipartisanship was gone, dead and gone. And it happened as abruptly as, the echocardiogram suddenly going to flatline. So having lived that experience, I could really see what's going on. And then as I dug into it, I began to see the enormous array of front groups that have been set up to facilitate the dark money corruption. It helps to have a whole, piano keys on the piano that you can play, that you can funnel the money through. And so all of that machinery got established. If you look at a super PAC is obliged to disclose its donors. So when I say a super PAC is an avenue for dark money, people say, huh? Super PACs are obliged to disclose their donors. They're only obliged to disclose their first donor. So if you are the Koch brothers, for instance, you want to run $15 million into a candidate super PAC, you send it to Donors Trust. Donors Trust then sends it to the super PAC, and all the world sees is Donors Trust, and Donors Trust does nothing except hide the real donor behind it. They're just a screening mechanism. And there are other ways to do it as well, through 501c4 agencies and so forth. So it wasn't just the permission to have unlimited dark money, it was also this enormous superstructure or infrastructure that got rapidly built and had no predecessor. It's one measure of how powerful this dark money influence is that it has supported this enormous infrastructure of, depending on who you read and who you believe, between 60 and 100 different organizations. And a piano player can play a lot of piano keys. So it's not necessarily that complicated to play a lot of phony front groups. We shouldn't think that that's beyond human capacity. So not just Citizens United, but then the immediate growth of that whole industry of dark money facilitation has been what this third phase has been.
Thank you. Could we have our first questioner, please? You need your mic.
Good morning, Senator.
Good
Thank
morning.
you for being here. My name is Andrew Abrahampour, and not just as a student of this university, but as a former member of our armed services and as an American citizen, why should Americans continue to have trust in government officials when corruption is constantly being uncovered? And do you have any comment on the terrifying idea that our great democracy is only a few cold, greasy handshakes away from becoming an oligarchy?
Well, I guess first is we have no alternative. You know, if you give up believing and if you give up trying, you have surrendered. I think what infuriates a lot of people and frustrates a lot of people is the sense that they don't know why this is happening. What is going on here? And they don't feel that they have a comprehensible explanation that provides a path. It's a little bit like having terrible symptoms all the time, and then one day the doctor says, oh yeah, you've got X, and this is how you fix X. And suddenly you're in a whole different world. You now know what you've had, the symptoms can be explained, and there's a pathway to a cure. And that's, I think, what I see my job to be, is to explain as clearly as I can what I at least think has happened and why people got so frustrated and angry and what's behind all of that and how we can fix it. I think we are a long way from being actually at the edge of losing our democracy, but I think for the first time in my life, that is actually a real prospect on the horizon. It was never plausible to me that our democracy was anything other than solid and robust and eternal. And now we have to plan ahead for, I think, some of the real threats that we're seeing to democracy around the world coming to roost here in America. So because this is a fight we can win, we need to fight it. And thank you for your service, because that's a very important way of protecting this great democracy.
Thank you, Senator.
Good morning, Senator.
Could you hold it close?
Sorry. Good morning,
okay.
Senator.
I think I'm mic'd more loudly than you are.
Thank you for coming to speak with us today. I'm Olivia Rathbun, and I was hoping you could give us a simplified explanation of how dark money works, why is it dangerous to our political system, and what its implications are in Rhode Island specifically.
So let me come at it from two angles. The first angle is the angle of the citizen. By virtue of being Americans, we inherit certain responsibilities to maintain our democracy. It is a popular democracy. We the people are the opening words. And so it's a very important thing that citizens have the knowledge that they need to be effective citizens in that democracy. And when citizens are presented in elections with advertisements that come into their TV rooms, that invade their TV screens, that spout really nasty stuff anonymously. You know, they have to say something at the end of the ad. This ad was brought to you, but it's brought to you by a sham group. I mock the notion of, Rhode Islanders for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity as a model sham group, but there are dozens of them, and they have kind of, creepy names like that. And when you're sitting there debating how you're going to participate in the next election, and something has come into your home and gotten onto your TV screen, and you don't even know what it is, and it's a sham, that is a terrible, terrible feeling to have. And once you've hidden the identity of a powerful political player, you've taken away from the public the ability to identify their motives and to discount their motives. So let's say an ad campaign comes up against me, and it's from ExxonMobil. And at the end, they have to say, we're ExxonMobil, and we approve this message. As best I can tell, I will tell them, please run that ad more. Because everybody in Rhode Island will get that I'm fighting for them against this big fossil fuel company, and it does me absolutely no harm to have you say whatever it is awful that you want to say, plus you have to be accountable if you're lying. But when it comes through Rhode Islanders for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity, nobody gets the joke, nobody sees the motive, and there's no sanction to land anywhere for lying. So it creates this awful environment for citizens. From the other side, from the special interest side, what you get to do now is to show up in, let's say, a leadership office in Congress and say, look, I've got the right now to spend unlimited money in politics, and I've got the right to hide that it's me, and I've got the infrastructure to hide it effectively, to run it out through all these phony front groups. So I can give you, Senate leader, $100 million to bombard your opponent's Senate campaigns through super PACs and through 501c4 groups, or I cannot do that. Would you like $100 million to help you get into the majority when I can hide this relationship so effectively? Too many people will say yes to that because it's the difference between winning and losing. And when they've done that, that was a private conversation. There's no chance of it being public. And if there's anything more defining of corruption than a private agreement for money to do certain things for a special interest, I don't know what it is. And I deeply believe that's what happened on climate change. I deeply believe that the fossil fuel industry went to the Republican leaders and they said, look, we can give you unlimited money in your coming elections. We can run it through super PACs, we can run it through phony front groups, or we can walk away from you. But if you want our money, if you want to be able to really bombard these Democrats, you're going to have to get all of your Republicans who've been fooling around with Democrats on climate stuff to knock it off. You're going to have to shut that down so there's no more bipartisanship, and now we can win on this by calling it a partisan issue. And I not only think that that's possible, I think that's what actually happened.
Thank you, Senator.
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Senator. My name is
Good
Nicole.
morning.
My question is, what measures can be taken to ensure transparency and disclosure with dark money in political campaigns, and are there any laws? I think you might have spoken a little bit on it with the prior question.
Yep. Well, let me start with a little bit of an aside that will explain itself once I've taken it. When the Supreme Court decided Citizens United, it had to deal with the problem of corruption, which Congress has every right to protect itself against and to protect the political system against. In order to allow unlimited amounts of money into government, they had to make the finding that unlimited amounts of money pouring into politics would not be corrupting, could not be corrupting. Zero chance of unlimited amounts of money in politics being corrupting, which is a semi-preposterous notion. And the way they justified it was to say that all of that spending was going to be transparent. All of the ads would say this was brought to you by ExxonMobil. That was the premise of Citizens United. So it left wide open the requirement of disclosure, of the actual transparency that the Supreme Court promised. And it's my bill in the Senate, and has been for a long time, the Disclose Act, to say if you give more than 10 grand into a race, you got to identify who you are. And it doesn't matter how many shell groups you put in front of you between you and the donation, it's got to go all the way back until you get the true beneficial interest donor who is behind it. And that way we all know. And what happens if the Disclose Act passes, I believe, is that somewhere between half and 2/3 of the present unlimited spending goes away because it becomes non-functional once the public can see who's doing it. And so I think you not only clean up the anonymity problem right away with that bill, at least for major donations, the ones that people pay attention to, but you also clean up a lot of the imbalance of where the political money in our government is coming from, because it takes the fun out of spending $50 million in political races if it actually hurts you and doesn't help you because everybody can see your motive.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the
Yeah.
answer.
Hello, my name is Natalie, and my question to go along with previous questions that were asked. So since people are allowed to remain anonymous in their donations on a super PAC, how is this legal?
It's legal really because nobody has shut it down. The Disclose Act doesn't exist, so there's not, I mean, it exists, but it's not law, so there's not a mechanism requiring disclosure. What originally started was that under the Internal Revenue Code, there are organizations called 501c4s. You probably know what a 501c3 is because every charity is a 501c3. A 501c4 is a little bit like that. It's a public interest organization, only it's allowed by IRS regulations to spend up to 50% of its money in politics. So the first thing that happened after Citizens United was that money flooded into 501c4s because they don't have to disclose their donors to the public. So you could take 501c4 money as a 501c4, you could spend 49.9% of it on political ads and then disclose no donors. So all the political world saw was the 501c4, Rhode Islanders for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity, and nobody knew who was really behind it. And so a whole array of 501c4s stood up. And then the Donors Trust Group came as another way to launder identities off money. And then 501c3s and 501c4s began to mingle. And they're just, now they're, as I said, there's this whole architecture of how you obscure who the donors are that travels through the laws. I think that the IRS could have knocked this off, but there was a terrible moment when they got caught looking at this stuff, and they were very clumsy and stupid about how they looked at it, and the right-wing media and the Republicans went berserk, asked that the woman who was running the program be prosecuted as a criminal, threatened to impeach the head of the IRS, and it was then President Obama at the time, and he refused to have anybody's back or to turn it into a teaching moment about what's really going on here. Everybody just rolled over, and so the IRS got the message, let the money flow because nobody's going to have your back.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask a broad question about climate change.
Yep.
So from a global perspective, what countries and companies, in your opinion, are the greatest threat to our planet?
Well, I think the fossil fuel industry is the threat, and they are a threat not just because of the physical pollution that they emit, that is their business model to emit, but because of the extent to which they have infiltrated themselves into the politics of countries, not just in the US, but all around the world. I mean, Gazprom and Putin are virtually indistinguishable in Russia. The head at the UAE, who's going to be hosting the next COP, is also the CEO of their fossil fuel company. And fossil fuel interests, I think, are responsible for probably 60 to 80% of the dark money in the US. Again, if you're defending a subsidy that's worth $700 billion to you, hypothetically, let's say you spend $7 billion on politics every year in the US. You're earning $100 for every dollar you spend. That's a return on investment that is unheard of. So of course the money is there, and of course the avenues of influence that it permits are there. And I think the fossil fuel industry needs to own a lot of that. I think the rest of corporate America has a lot of responsibility as well, because in the world that I live in, corporations sometimes show up, like CVS will show up because I'm from Rhode Island and they're from Rhode Island and they care about it. Amica Insurance will show up but they don't have much clout compared to the trade associations that are the intermediaries between an industry and the Congress. The trade associations are there day in and day out. The trade associations tend to run the politics. The trade associations have enormous amounts of power and clout. And almost without exception, America's trade associations are against climate action in Congress, which is weird because the bankers are warning of these massive systemic economic threats that will take down their business. The insurers are abandoning markets that used to be lucrative, and the Bankers Association and the Insurance Association have nothing useful to say about climate, and their silence is deafening. Move to the other end, and you get the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the most powerful trade association, supposedly representing all of America's business interests. It is my most powerful enemy. They're my enemy in court when they show up writing briefs anti-climate. They're my enemy in regulatory world when they show up authoring comments against climate regulations. They're my enemies in politics because they spend dark money on people who will vote against climate legislation, and they give directly to candidates, and by and large it's candidates who oppose climate action. And of course, with all that power, what they do is they come in and they're against every significant climate bill. So all of corporate America has to have an accountability moment about its trade associations.
Thank you.
I don't sign random pledges. I'm kind of in the business of, being in a policy world. So I'm more than happy to take a look at it, but I tend to do things through the ordinary process of my office. And I would be very surprised if any fossil fuel company was donating to me. It would most distinctly not be in their interest, but I'm happy to take it up outside this forum. Like I said, take it up with the office. I'm more than happy to consider it. Yeah, and like I said, I'm more than happy to consider it, but I don't do, spontaneous signing of things I haven't read and haven't gone through the. One of the reasons I have an office is to have a process to evaluate things and work through them. Every dollar that I get is publicly reported, so they absolutely do know.
I think we need to end now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Grace.